I'm going to share with you how I attach my quilt bindings with my serger. It's definitely my favorite way now that I've started doing this, and I do that with my machine set up for a 4-thread overlock. You'll see here I've already trimmed up the edges of my quilt right along the outer 4 edges. You'll want to have that exactly where you want the edges to stop. I've cut my quilt bindings 2.5 inches wide, and I've cut it to where I have enough to go all the way around all 4 outer edges of the quilt, and then go ahead and allow at least an extra 20 inches to be safe. It'll probably be way more than enough. I'm using my open toe foot. You use the foot that's best for your serger. This foot allows me to visually see those red lines to line up with the positioning of the needles. That's what they represent on my foot. And I'm using an overlock, a 4-thread overlock stitch. So my needle that's all the way to the left is the first needle that's going to stitch the seam. And that's the one that I'm really concerned about lining up straight, because that needle is going to go right along the intersection of the fabric. Notice that I've placed it right sides together. And after I start, once again, coming off the edge, I'm going to line up that notch that I'm showing you along with the intersections of the fabric. And this is going to help you have a nice accurate seam. Here's a second way of doing it. If you have your strips cut straight across on the ends, you can take those and put them right sides together, and you'll notice that I'm going to allow a heavy 1/4 inch to extend off of the side edge and the top edge, and then we're going to pivot the fabric sideways. So you'll notice now you have your strips just extending off to the left. Once again, we'll use the notch on the presser foot to guide along the intersections of the fabric. And a friend of mine who is a fellow baby lock educator told me this trick. If you kind of look at how you have your bindings laid out right now, it looks like a pair of pants extending off to the left, 2 legs. So you're going to stitch that seam across the waistband. So if you can think of that seam being a waistband, that might be a nice visual for you to remember how to arrange your quilt binding strips before you place them together. Now that we have our bindings all stitched together, we're going to take them, and they need to be pressed in half, wrong sides together. We also need to fold over at one top edge a 45-degree angle. So you're going to take that top corner, fold it over to where it lines up with that right edge, and give it a press. When we get started placing this on the serger, we don't want to start at the very beginning, but I am going to just kind of clip it in place with my precision clips. I love these little clips, by the way. And I'm just going to kind of clip a couple of places to kind of secure it. We're going to start stitching. Probably you'll want to start, I tend to start maybe about 4 inches down, 3 or 4 inches down. Notice that I have the raw edge of the binding lined up with the raw edge of the quilt. And I'm going to stitch it onto the back side of the quilt. So the quilt that I'm playing with right now that I'm stitching my binding on is a reversible quilt, but I want to attach my bindings from the back of the quilt, right sides together. And I'm just seaming, I'm guiding the right edges along my knife. It's just skimming the blade ever so slightly. This is why it's really important to have the outer edge of your quilt trimmed accurately. And then we're off to the races. It's just really going to be quite easy. We're coming up to the corner. So here I'm just kind of showing you where the corner is. I'm going to grab a marking pen. This is my friction pen. And I just want to make a 45-degree angle that lines up with the point, the bottom of your quilt. And I'm going to serge forward. This is another reason why I'm using my open toe foot, because I can see more accurately where my needles are. So I'm serging forward to where my needles are going to stop right where I made that pin mark with the angle. See how you can see it? I'm just kind of showing you there. That's where I want to stop. And I'm going to keep my needles down, and I'm just going to gently just kind of pivot the fabric at like a 45-degree angle and serge off. So you'll notice how my stitches are just serged off at an angle. And now we're going to turn our quilt, bring the binding straight up and straight down, just like we would do traditionally with our binding. How easy was that? Okay, so let's just continue forward. I'm going to slip the quilt back up underneath the presser foot along with the binding, and I'm going to continue to just serge down, allowing the right edges of the binding and the quilt to just skim the blade of the knife. Very, very easy. Once I get to the next corner, we're going to go ahead and also mark that angle. There's my angle. I'm going to mark it on top of the binding because that's what I can see from the top. There, I just stitch forward. I have my needles down. I kind of raise my presser foot and then just pivot a little bit to where you get that 45-degree angle, and then go straight up and straight down once again. And we'll continue that process. Raise our presser foot, slip our quilt and our binding underneath it one more time. Serge on down all the way till you get to the corner. So we're just going to kind of be repeating ourselves until we get all the way around the quilt, but I'm going to go ahead and let you watch this process multiple times. That way it can make more sense to you as we go around again and again. Repetition builds long-term memory, so I love it whenever I can watch something over and over again because it does become something that's just really comfortable to me and I remember it better. So once again, we're at another corner. We're going to draw that 45-degree angle, just showing you my friction pen. You can use any of your marking pens that disappear. This is going to be, the binding is going to be folded, so you won't see that mark when we take and fold the binding over. Again, I'm just serging to where the needles are going to meet up to the line. If you're a little bit off, don't worry too much. It'll all come together. Pivot and serge off that angle. Fold it straight up and straight down. Once again, we're going to go ahead, place it back up underneath the presser foot, and serge down until we get to the next angle, next corner, to create our angle. The serger does such a good job holding onto your quilt. I find that my hands really don't get a workout when I'm doing this, so it's easier on my shoulders, it's easier on my hands. So that's why I find that I just really do love this method. Here I'm at another corner. We'll draw our line once again, serge to where our needles are going to meet that angle, that line, that drawn line, raise our presser foot, gently pivot, and serge off. Straight up, straight down, and continue on. You'll notice in this little area I have a little bit of that intersection where the bindings were little ears or so, whatever you kind of like to call it, kind of poking out. And what's going to be nice about it is the serger is going to just clean that all up for me. Alright, so here I'm getting ready to finish it all up. Now this is why you don't start right at the beginning of your point at your angle, because we want the top binding, we want it to extend at least an inch past where your bottom folded area. See, just above where my clip is, you want to make sure you have at least an inch or an inch and a half that's going to extend below that folded edge. And then we're going to just tuck in that top binding piece into the bottom piece of our binding where we started. And once again, I'm just going to kind of clip it all together. And you might find it necessary to just raise your presser foot every once in a while so you can adjust your binding so it's laying smoothly whenever you're attaching all of your layers together. And then I'm just going to go ahead and trim my tail. And look how pretty that looks. It's nice and finished. And when I fold it over, you'll notice that the width of the binding on the back is thinner. The width of the binding on the front is a bit thicker. But I still love the look of it. I'm going to go ahead and trim any of my serger tails on all four corners. And then fold over my binding. And go ahead and give it a press and position your corners to create your miter on each corner, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch the folded edge of the binding straight down. And so on the back of the stitch, you're going to see a bit of your bobbin thread. And so typically what you can do is just match your bobbin thread to the back of your quilt, because you're going to see it since the back of the binding is thinner than the top of the binding. So I'll go ahead and continue to top stitch with my straight stitch all the way around the corner. And you'll notice I have my machine to where I have my pivot feature activated. That's going to stop with my needle down and my presser foot up. So if your machine has that feature, I would highly recommend you using it. It just really does help the process, make it easier on you. And so when I pivot at a corner, I like to turn the corner and then back stitch a little bit and then continue forward. That gives it a little extra security on each one of those corners once I've turned the corner. It's kind of a Lori technique, kind of a habit of how I do it. So I'll go ahead and continue up to the point of this, and once I've gone ahead and allowed my needle to get to the opposite side of the binding there, then I'll go ahead and take and pivot the quilt around. The miters are just so easy to create and pin in place and press with the way the binding is attached. And it actually has trimmed out a lot of the bulk that you might feel like you have to struggle with when you put on your binding traditionally. Now, if you're a person that places your quilts into quilt shows, I don't know what the judges will think about this, but I create my quilts to be loved, to give away as gifts, and to teach other people how to do things, how to quilt, how to do different techniques. So it's definitely something that I enjoy doing. I like this technique. It makes it easier on me, and I like the way the whole process flows. So here I'm finishing. I'm going to go ahead and do it again, a little back tack. So I have that top stitch done. Again, you're going to see that stitch on the back, so match your bobbin threads to the back of your quilt. And now we have all 4 sides finished. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. Please click that like button and don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to have my Facebook group, my Instagram, and my YouTube channel noted here at the end, so definitely pop over there, like, join, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you next time on the next tutorial.